Well, thanks for staying with us. Time now for Campaign Chronicles, France 24's regular countdown to the presidential election here. Well, for that, I'm joined by our French politics editor, Mark Parelman. Hi, Mark. And also, of course, our media editor, James Creedon, who will be bringing us the latest reactions in the press and on the blogs to the race. But first of all, so turn to you, Mark. So it's less than 2 weeks to go before round one. What are the polls looking like?
Well, the polls, there's a flurry of polls. The last week of polling, 3 polls came out today, and they show a very similar picture and a worrying picture for the incumbent, the Conservative President Nicolas Sarkozy, because in round one, he's slightly ahead of his main rival, the socialist François Hollande, 1 to 3 percentage points according to the polls. They are way in front, the two of them, of the second tier of candidates, where the far left leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon has been on the rise, and he's now neck to neck with Marine Le Pen, the far right leader. They're around 15%. And then falling behind is the centrist candidate, François Bayrou, who's now under 10%. He was he was around 13%. He's now 10%. But the most important figures are the round 2 figures, and they show that François Hollande would win between 53 to 55% according to the polling institutes, and Nicolas Sarkozy still has 6 to 10% behind François Hollande. So it's a major problem. In the Sarkozy camp, they're telling us the first round is one story, the second round is a totally different story. However, history shows that it's actually not the same. You had some candidates who didn't perform well in the first round, but really performed well in the second round. But the problem for Nicolas Sarkozy, he doesn't have a reservoir of votes, whereas François Hollande has a wider one. According to the recent polls, the left has a total of 45%, which is historically high, and that's the big problem for Nicolas Sarkozy. So he's hoping to finish first in the first round, as looks likely right now, but he's also hoping that he will be 3 to 4 points ahead of François Hollande to have some breathing room and some room to maneuver for round 2. But for now, the polls are bad for the president. So
the pressure's on. It's make or break for Sarkozy now.
Absolutely. It's make or break. So he's trying to get as many votes as possible. And so today he visited an area where he's not been saying a lot, the so-called banlieue, the downtrodden French suburbs. He was in Drancy, a place also that's symbolic for France because it is a place where Jews were deported during World War II. There was a well-known camp in Drancy. Today there's a sizable Muslim population, and so the president went there to talk today about the role of religion in bringing people together. Let's take a listen to Nicolas Sarkozy today in Drancy.
I've come here to meet with the leaders of the religious communities. This city has a painful history. The rabbi, the imam and the pastor here have had the wisdom to talk together, to bring together their communities and reject any kind of fundamentalism.
So togetherness, of course, but not only that. Nicolas Sarkozy, on the sidelines of this visit, blasted François Hollande, his socialist rival, for not doing enough for those poor suburbs, and saying, you know, I spent 46 billion euros to try to renew all the urban areas near the large French cities, and the socialists have not spent any penny over there. The socialists fired back a statement saying Nicolas Sarkozy was lying, that he was the mayor of the posh suburb of Neuilly-sur-Seine near Paris, and that he didn't give a damn about the people in those poor suburbs. So clearly the fight is on. Every vote counts. The issue is that in those suburbs, people tend to stay home rather than to vote. And so the candidates are doing all they can to rile up support in those areas.
Brilliant. Now, James, François Hollande has actually refused to give an interview to right-leaning paper Le Figaro. What's that all about?
That's right. Well, I suppose it's the communications war, as Mark was alluding to there. I think it didn't Sarkozy even say that Hollande had not one single idea for the banlieue. So
absolutely.
So it's sort of, I don't know where the truth is in all of that, but people are certainly trying to get their message across. Hollande's message today is that right-leaning newspaper that Sarkozy voters read. I'm not going to give an interview to it because basically 2 weeks ahead of the first round of voting, Le Figaro has said that they want to interview each of the 10 candidates, of course, some less well-known than others, in the 10 days, weekdays at least, leading up to the vote. Except François Hollande said, not me, you're not interviewing me, I want nothing to do with you. Let's take a listen to how he justified that quite dramatic decision on an interview on French television this morning.
Vous avez lu le Figaro depuis plusieurs mois, non? Le Figaro n'a pas pris position, c'est même pas une prise de position. C'est d'une certaine façon, chaque jour, un discrédit, une déconsidération de ce que je suis. Ils en ont parfaitement le droit, c'est la liberté de la presse.
Right, so a somewhat controversial decision to sideline, blacklist, just totally banish one of the main newspapers in the country, albeit a right-leaning newspaper, albeit a pro-free market, pro-UMP mostly newspaper. A lot of people saying that wasn't a very wise idea. The Journal du Dimanche.
Petty, some people might say.
I think so, and in fact, the question that left-leaning paper Rue 89 or website Rue 89 said, is this courageous or is it anti-democratic? Anti-democratic might be taking it a little bit too far. The Journal du Dimanche says it's an error in communications. The well-respected Renaud Revel, media editor at the Express newspaper, said that PR should not be built around banishing a paper. It's human to be perhaps upset by some of what Le Figaro says, but to banish or blacklist is not the right attitude. So many people saying there that that's a silly thing to do from François Hollande's
We'll see if Nicolas Sarkozy retaliates by not granting an interview to the left-leaning newspaper Libération, which would be sad for democracy and the media.
Well, it's not very good statesman-like behaviour from anyone who indulges in it, I guess.
You have to, I suppose, as Italy said, you need to talk. You need to go into enemy territory to convince voters. You can't just stay in your own camp.
Right, no, in Nanterre, just outside of Paris, far-right candidate Marine Le Pen invited foreign journalists for an unusual press conference. Now, National Front leader promised to talk only about international issues and the financial crisis. She did, however, also heavily criticise President Nicolas Sarkozy at the same time. Valérie Lebon and Clovis Casali were there to tell us more.
She's clearly anti-European, in favour of increased protectionism. If elected, Marine Le Pen wants to renegotiate international treaties, abandon the euro and go back to the franc. Not surprising that many of France's partners view her with suspicion. To clear the air, she invited the foreign press to her headquarters here in Nanterre outside Paris to talk, of course, international issues.
Regarding Libya, I've repeatedly said that we've given the reins of power to jihadists. During the whole of his term, Nicolas Sarkozy has in all circumstances helped and strengthened Islamic fundamentalists, whether it's at home or abroad.
Russians, Japanese, Germans, journalists of all nationalities have turned up to hear from Marine Le Pen. So what do they actually think of the National Front leader? How do foreign states perceive the French far right?
I know she once tried to come to Israel, but the authorities didn't let her in. She wasn't welcome. But it's not because Israelis hate her. It's just the normal treatment for all far-right politicians.
In our country, Spain, there isn't a far-right party as powerful as the National Front in France. Here, immigration and leaving the Eurozone are questions raised a lot more often.
She shouldn't forget the Africans, the foreigners who have become French nationals. Promoting her policies is like saying, I don't need their votes.
Marine Le Pen is extremely confident ahead of the election. While some polls give her 17% of the votes, a third place, she accuses them of being dishonest and incompetent. She aims for nothing less than the place in the second round, like her father in 2002.
Now, before we go, we've got enough time to look at another way the media seems to be getting some flack, and this time from Jean-Luc Mélenchon.
That's right. Guns are out amongst the candidates today for various media. This time it's the BBC, apparently. Now, worth pointing out that the BBC, in their article on Jean-Luc Mélenchon, written by Hugh Schofield, this was the second last paragraph. They weren't making a big deal of this, but apparently Mélenchon called them connard de journaliste, which is kind of journalist moron. That's
a very nice way of
a
putting it.
mild way of putting it even. But in any case, that sentence is what was concentrated on by the French media. Let's take a look at this headline in Nouvel Observateur. They put it right up in the headline, Connard de journaliste, whereas really... so the point being, Jean-Luc Mélenchon has often got into very serious altercations with journalists where he's criticised the profession, criticised the lack of professionalism, more to the point. Let's take a look at this extract from 2010 when he got into an altercation with a journalism student over whether or not the issue of brothels should have been front-page news when voter apathy was a much bigger issue, according to him.
Personne s'est dit, tiens, je préférerais dans une maison close qu'aller chercher les putes au coin de la rue. Voilà, j'ai jamais entendu quelqu'un me parler de ça. Sinon, vous et votre sale corporation de voyeuristes et vendeuses de papier. Tu fermes ta petite bouche, tu me parles de politique. Moi, je te parle de médias et de ton métier pourri. Si je veux vous parler du titre du Parisien, petite cervelle.
So there you go, a hot-headed man back in 2010 and still today, to some extent, but it does him a favour as well. Just a quick mention of the website, if we could have a look on the computer at the social media buzz section of our website, worth checking out at the moment. Lots to see and interact with just a few weeks ahead of the election.
Brilliant. Thanks very much,
Thanks,
Mark Perelman and James Creedon. That was Campaign Chronicles.